Let's talk about Granblue Fantasy Relink, a new action JRPG that features spectacular action, a relatively short campaign by JRPG standards, and a fairly in-depth endgame. If you're looking for an action JRPG that will not waste your time, then this is your game. The campaign should run you no longer than 20 hours, depending on your difficulty, and this game moves at a breakneck pace. You're practically sprinting from one engagement to another with little room for exploration. When you are able to explore some of these areas, the game is very obvious with its pathing. You'll practically never get lost, and if you do, there's a guide in Vern to help you find your way. Some chapters will feature multiple set pieces and multiple boss fights, and these can range from being good to excellent. In fact, they're practically the big highlight of Granblue Fantasy Relink. If you are enamored with some of the fights found in Final Fantasy XVI, then you'll love most of these encounters. There was probably one boss fight that I wasn't a big fan of, but for the most part, each of these fights had depth and were fairly challenging. I recommend that between each chapter you complete side quests to ensure that you're properly leveled. If you ever happen to find yourself going into certain boss fights underleveled, it can be a big mistake because bosses become taxing very early. They're going to start throwing the kitchen sink at you, and with all the things that are happening around you, it can be very distracting while you're trying to manage your positioning as well as your team's health. Side quests, for the most part, are fairly easy to complete, and most won't run you any longer than 10 minutes. They can be repeated multiple times, but you only really need to do them once to gain the experience you need to level up. They're also excellent for getting yourself familiarized with the different crewmates you can play as. During the campaign, the captain is required, and while they're the most balanced character in the game to start, it is fun to experiment with other crewmates because they all handle differently. To unlock different crewmates, you'll need crewmate cards, and a few can be unlocked as you progress through the campaign, but others require you to complete certain side quests. If you have a fear of any of these crewmates being underleveled, don't be. You're going to gain experience quickly, and they'll have larger sections of their skill trees unlocked, which can be helpful early on because those skill tree points can be very expensive, and having a balanced team is key to success. It is important that as you gain experience and skill points that you evenly distribute those points to ensure that your squad can be effective in combat as you move along the campaign. Each character has 3 trees: offense, defense, and one specific to that character's weapon. The weapon level is more of a bonus because when your weapon reaches a certain level, you can unlock a certain stat increase, and some of these can be substantial. The skill trees do provide pathing options, but if you want to upgrade the entire tree, you can, but just know that it is incredibly expensive. I made it a point to upgrade to the abilities I wanted and to get the sigils unlocked quicker because the buffs provided by those sigils can help greatly in combat. You'll also want to upgrade your weapons often and uncap them to ensure that you're doing the maximum amount of damage. Be warned though that upgrading and forging can be fairly expensive. Your skill tree will also extend after Chapter 5 and upon entering the endgame. The campaign, for the most part, is enjoyable, but I think that the one big gripe I have is that the game practically expects the player to be familiar with the Granblue universe. There are so many references being made to characters that seem relevant to the plot but will never show up. And they also talk about events that took place prior to the events of this game. It's it feels like you're kind of like in the middle of an adventure and something just happened and broke out and now you're just focused on this. That's how it feels like we're just in the middle of everything. And I think that's a really weird design choice because the developers are trying to pack in all this history knowing that the franchise is only going to be familiar to a certain audience. If you want to know more about the characters or the world, there's a Fate quest section at the quest counter, and it's going to provide exposition on the different characters. You can also use Lyria's journal for more information as well. Specific text will also be highlighted during certain dialogue cutscenes, and if you open up the glossary when you see these texts, you're going to get a rundown on what's being referenced. And I appreciate that, I really do, but still, it doesn't change the fact that for whatever reason, this game is like, you're supposed to know about the Granblue universe. Like, nobody knows anything. We don't know how these characters got together. We're just kind of in the middle of an adventure, which I thought was really weird. The other issue I had was that I don't think the campaign is unique in the slightest. And I really mean that from like a narrative standpoint. It's fairly vanilla. If you've played other JRPGs that feature world-ending prophecies and cataclysms, then you're going to get where I'm coming from. I will say that the final few chapters do feature some pretty interesting twists, but for the most part, the campaign doesn't do enough to stand out, at least narratively. Every chapter starts with a monologue from the captain, which I think adds a bit of character to them because they were mostly silent throughout the game. It's kind of weird though that they give you dialogue choices, and none of these have any impact on the story, so you can select whatever you want without consequence. Like I said, I don't think anyone's going to be wowed at the narrative, but it is competent and it does feature some pretty visually appealing moments. This is a gorgeous game, and with everything happening around you, I was really impressed by how polished my experience was. I played this on the PS5 and did not experience a single hiccup when it came to performance. The set pieces in this game are fantastic, and they make you really want to push through the campaign to see what happens next. Certain chapters do stand out more than others, and I can confidently say that the final chapter is pretty excellent. I really enjoyed the final battle, even though it felt visually overwhelming at times. The production values found in Relink are excellent. It's just a shame that the game lacks interactivity when you arrive at the different towns. Essentially, it's all window dressing, and I really think that's the nicest way I can put it. Only certain NPCs in this game can be spoken to, and saying that you're speaking to them is putting it lightly. They just provide you with different side quests. If you've played any MMO, that's essentially what this is. You just walk up to them, you see this icon appear above their head, you see them like list out the things they want you to do. That's it. And all of these quests can be completed instantly if you have the gathered material or if you've beaten a certain enemy type or boss while playing through the campaign or the different side quests. It's that easy. And one of the things I really like is that once you've completed a side quest, it shows up as reportable in your menu and you can teleport to the requester. I mentioned before that this game does not waste your time, and that is 100% the truth. It's just a shame that with how dense and packed these hub areas are, that there's little to no interactivity to speak of. And sure, there are chests you can find, but that's about it. It's just disappointing given how beautiful this game is that there's almost nothing here for you to do besides combat. So if you feel like the campaign or the world itself lacks depth, I'm not going to blame you. I felt that way as well. And I believe it's intentional because they're trying to emphasize action, and that's something they absolutely nail in this game. So, outside of those issues, and those can be seen as minor and probably dismissed by a number of people, I think that the only issue that I had really with this game that bothered me a lot is the lock on camera. When you're fighting flying enemies or bosses, it can be a real pain in the ass. I feel like the lock on camera is also not useful when targeting specific areas of an enemy, and I really recommend you don't try to use it if there are certain environmental items that surround you because you will lock onto them. I have on a number of occasions fought enemies where I was trying to flick my right thumbstick to target the legs or tail of a monster, and instead I was locking on to a pillar that could be broken. And that was a big pain in the ass because you really can't notice it until that boss moves out of sight and then you're not facing the enemy anymore. And the problem is, when you get high up in level, some of these bosses require your full attention. So any slip up will more than likely lead to you getting one shot, which is incredibly frustrating. I only use the lock on camera to really orient myself to the enemies. Other than that, it was just used sparingly, and it's just one of those things that I hope gets fixed in the future because it's a real pain in the ass to use now. Once you complete the campaign, a new chapter unlocks and you're now at the end game. New systems are introduced at the trader and blacksmith. You're going to be able to appraise certain curios that you can earn in the different side quests, and you can now fast travel. There is a caveat to fast travel though, and that's only available for the specific hub town you're in, which I thought was a weird design choice. You can also customize your character's look, but this is fairly basic. It's really just the color scheme, but some of them do look really cool. Siegfried, for example, has different armor, and he also looks like Guts from Berserk with that armor on, which is amazing. The quest counter will allow you to take up quick quests, and these can range in difficulty. The game, however, does take into account your current level, so if you're too high, it will rebalance the encounter so you can't be too OP. You're also able to replay the campaign via chapter select, so if there are certain things that you missed, such as the Omen Stones for challenging combat encounters, then you can dive right back in. The endgame adds a number of new quests, and what's weird is that I really feel like if you are properly leveled, you're more than likely not going to struggle with a number of the fights. But the moment you start facing some of these bosses, it can be really difficult because some of these bosses are really powerful and really tanky. And sometimes your AI controlled teammates just don't want to move out of the way. They just don't want to roll or parry and they end up getting killed. So you have to meet certain requirements at the higher levels. And usually when you see like critical states, you only have like one shot at it. So you're trying desperately to keep your team alive. I really feel like in these moments, the co-op is where it's at. And co-op, by the way, is pretty good. But it is really frustrating facing some of these enemies. You go from pretty much everyone being at your level to something that's like 5 to 10 levels above you. And then you're just hoping that the AI is not as aggressive as it usually is because they can go down fairly quickly and that can be pretty frustrating. But it is a really nice challenge. The quest rewards here in the end game net you a lot of resources and you can use those to forge new weapons. And it's pretty great because some of them are really funny looking. They have like some gimmick weapons, but for the most part, it's just nice melting certain enemies that gave you problems. I really like the fact that with the end game, it really kind of puts this emphasis on team composition. Some characters are just better suited for certain encounters than others, so you can change up teams as you see fit. Characters are going to level up quickly. You're going to earn a lot of skill points, by the way, and it's going to help strengthen your team. Just like the campaign, the end game doesn't want to waste your time. It tries to go as hard as possible from the start, and it really wants you to lose yourself in its combat and spectacle. As a JRPG fan, I expected Granblue Fantasy Relink to have a fairly lengthy campaign, unique side quests, a number of different in-depth systems, and a large, sprawling open world. In short, I was expecting Tales of Arise 2.0, but instead, I found a game that was straight to the point and did little to deviate from its goal to getting you into the endgame. This is a rare linear JRPG, and I appreciate that the developers did not try to hide it. They know exactly what they wanted the player to experience, and they did not try to overcomplicate it with bloat. And I honestly really appreciate that. The moment I realized what the developers were trying to accomplish, I kind of turned my brain off to what I expected in regard to a normal, traditional JRPG, and ended up having a lot of fun with this title. I think diving into the end game has been great, and that is either solo or co-op. So I really had a good time with Granblue Fantasy Relink. I hope people go into this with tempered expectations and kind of peel back not knowing that this is a strict action JRPG and there is little to no deviation from that formula. I can recommend this game to anyone. I had a really good time with it, and I'm having a really good time with it. And that's going to do it for this video. If you happen to like the content, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. I'm Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.
Catalina, I'll protect you! Oink it!
I got him!
Looking good!
Narmaya!
Submit!